KK understands it fine. She doesn't like it and is trying to hammer it into something else. I think it's both. I agree. She doesn't like it and she wants to replace it because that's what she's been doing ever since she became head of Lucasfilm. It really just seems malicious at this point. Every character that any fan has loved, their stories are being repurposed into the Disney era characters. Yeah, and I do feel that she doesn't understand. She's not a nerd. She's not a nerd. She doesn't understand it. But I also do think it's malicious too, so I agree. You think with lore experts who work at Lucasfilm, they would have a better understanding of the lore. I know, well, when you have someone in Dave Filoni, the so-called executive creative officer or chief creative officer, he himself has stated so many times that it's all tall tales to him, and it does, canon and lore does not matter. That he thinks these inconsistencies actually incentivize fans to explore these different mediums of stories, when actually in reality it does the opposite. Because if you don't have consistency across all of these multimedia entries to your franchise, it waters it. It dilutes its importance. If there's no continuity, then if you don't care about canon, then why should fans? That's basically what's the problem with all these shows. All of these shows that I'm looking at right here, these feel like they don't connect to each other. And that's the problem. Andor does not feel like it belongs in the same universe as Obi-Wan. It's just so different in quality, but also just in the story itself. They don't match. They should feel like they match. Like if you have all of your live action stuff should feel like it's in the same universe, and none of these do. They are all over the place in terms of stories and characters and tone and quality. It's just crazy. At least in the previous EU, they all tried to be, like every creator across books and comics and video games, tried to be as consistent as they could with the spirit of George Lucas's lore. They didn't want to mess with the film's canon because that was immovable in Star Wars history, but there was still some flexibility in that. But they all respected the IP, the lore. And when it came to like book authors and collaborating, they would talk to each other. It just recently came out after Cortosis was introduced in the Acolyte, or reintroduced after it was stolen from the Legends EU. The writer Michael Stackpole of iJedi said that he collaborated with Timothy Zahn because it was Timothy Zahn's idea of Cortosis. They worked with each other and they determined that they would introduce it in Michael Stackpole's novel iJedi to pave the way for Timothy Zahn's later Thrawn duology. So they work together, and all of the writers in a series like the New Jedi Order series, like all of those work together so that their books would be consistent with each other. So they had that internal consistency, and that's just missing. Sam Witwer, who of course was from Force Unleashed, but also voiced Darth Maul in the Clone Wars. He brought this issue up to Dave Filoni about lore and canon when he was narrating a Darth Maul book, and he noticed a discrepancy when it came to Darth Maul's background and history. And he brought this up to Dave Filoni. Because like, oh, what should we do? Because this isn't what was established in the show. And he said, no, it's fine. It actually should be like that. It's all tall tales. It gives people a reason to dive into this other thing. And like, that's literally not what that does. It just makes it feel unconnected. If it doesn't feel like it's connected, then fans actually have less incentive to go into these other mediums if they don't feel like they match up, like they're in the same universe. And if you can't get one character and their journey straight across these different mediums, then I don't know, then what is Dave Filoni's job? It almost feels like somewhere in the past 10 years, we've shifted into an alternate universe, and producers and writers and directors are reading materials from a parallel universe. Can you get me out of this timeline? Where Acolyte doesn't exist and I get Star Trek Legacy? They don't even have Darth Vader at Galaxy's Edge. It's all a scam. Exactly. And it's not just creative decisions, which are horrible. Every decision from a commercial standpoint, it's like they want to burn money. Nothing that they've done so far, Disney Lucasfilm, has made sense from a business standpoint. You're calling out the fans, even before your show comes out, and giving them a hard time preemptively because you know the show is crap for not liking it. You're like pre-blaming them for your trash heap of a show. But these fans are customers. They're the ones that buy your merch, that pay for all of the things, books, comics, toys. They take their kids to the parks. These are customers at the end of the day. And this is a customer service business. But they forget that, or they don't care. And that's what I was saying before with Glenn Powell, his comments, that this is an underserved IP. And there's nothing that can't be solved by a good movie or show. Like, if they just took some time before they started their movies and really thought about what the fans would like and what would be an amazing story. And I feel like Picard Season 3 is a great lesson for anyone trying to take over a legacy IP within a very well-established fan base, just to honor what came before, but give your heroes, your legacy characters, a great story while introducing the new generation that are well-formed characters in their own right. Andor Season 2 is the only Star Wars thing I have confidence will be good. Yeah, I agree because of what we've gotten so far. Yeah, I'm looking forward, I will admit, to seeing K2SO. I think he was the best part of Rogue One, in my opinion. So I'm looking forward to that. Andor was so good. I'm not a giant Star Wars fan, and I enjoyed it the most. Yeah, that seems to be the consensus, that it was very well made. And I think for the kind of show that it was, you had a guy who was very experienced in that sort of espionage kind of shows, in Tony Gilroy. It could have been, and maybe that's the issue that some fans have with it, maybe why it didn't strike a chord with a lot in the fandom, was it could have probably been any sort of generic sci-fi universe, and maybe they were missing those just core elements that feel like Star Wars. But overall, yeah, it was well made, and I think those that started watching it kept watching it, which is something the Acolytes having issues with now, obviously. I'll be curious to see, like, when it all is said and done. And yeah, probably Andor is the best, you could argue, is the best quality. But I think that even The Mandalorian, like, that was pretty strong. But the problem is that each of these new entries were trying to justify and make the sequel trilogy make sense. So they kept incorporating these story elements that were only there to lay the groundwork for the sequel trilogy and to making that make sense, because there were just massive plot holes, and it didn't make sense for the First Order to have been there, and made even less sense as the sequel trilogy continued when it came to Palpatine and this whole like hidden Sith society. Was it Exegol? Oh, brother. And the Force dyads, that they introduced all these things that they then had to use these other shows to justify those elements that were poorly conceived of in the movies. So I think probably now, it started with The Mandalorian, and even in season 1, because you had to have Force healing in there. You saw little baby Yoda heal Greef Karga, and I hated that. I mean, the show was entertaining enough, but that really bothered me. And it just got worse from there. They had to introduce the cloning stuff so that they could make the Palpatine thing make sense. And that continued on extensively so with The Mandalorian, with season 3 being like a huge focus with the cloning thing. And then they just kind of threw stuff in there like Thrawn and everything without thinking, just haphazardly. The more I hear, the more I am glad I do not know the story beats. Kenobi was my last straw. The last good story left in Star Wars is its fall. It's sad that we've come to this state, because they've mined it, but not in a good way.